So right now, I'm going to talk to you about advanced air mobility. I'm going to look at two ends of the spectrum. I'm going to look at drone deliveries, which is relatively small, and specifically medical drone deliveries. But then I'm going to look up to the much larger class of people and cargo carrying, and we're going to look at about distributed zero carbon aviation networks. That's a bit of a mouthful, so I'll get into that later on. So hopefully you're expecting that and you're going to stick around. If not, please stick around anyway, because it's something which I'm absolutely passionate about. It's fascinating. It's such an exciting industry. So I'll take you through this over the course of about 30 minutes, and then we'll have a little bit of time left over for Q&A as you would like. But let's start off a little bit about myself. So yes, I am a person as well. I'm a husband, I'm a father. I spend a lot of time walking my dogs, and rarely I get out on my bike, but I do try to every now and again. One of the reasons I love the opportunity to speak at Bristol Tech Fest is because that's kind of where it all started for me. I'm a Bristol University alumnus. I did aeronautical engineering back in, I started in the last millennium, which will give you an idea of my age, and graduated in this millennium. And that's where it started, enabled me to kick on to chartered engineer status, chartered manager status. I also spent a happy number of years in the Royal Air Force. And one of my favorite tours was doing test and evaluation. I'm a graduate of the Empire Test Pilot School. Having done a lot of crewed aviation and piloted aviation over my Air Force career, I was very fortunate to be able to look into the uncrewed aviation space since I left. And some people have decided that I've had a few good things to say. So there's a picture of me on the screen talking at Bristol Tech Fest about this time last year. It's very kind of them to have me back. Also podcasts that I've spoken upon, and there's a link there if ever you want to hear a little bit more about some of my thoughts on the drone industry. And then in what very little spare time I have left, I love to learn about renewable energy, and I'm doing some distance learning at Loughborough University. So sort of sustainable mobility and looking at it from an ecosystem point of view, not just from the aviation background. Deloitte, from a drones perspective, this is what we look at. We look at it from three prongs, really. We've got a sensing side, sustainability, and then the advanced air mobility. And this is what we're trying to look at today. So not really any of the sensing, a little bit of sustainability because it just sort of flows so nicely as part of advanced air mobility, but really focusing on that advanced air mobility piece. And as I said, the two ends of the spectrum. So let's look at a couple of definitions of advanced air mobility. Here's one that actually Deloitte has coined, and it's the emergence of transformative airborne technology to transport people and goods in new, community-friendly and cost-effective aircraft in both rural and urban environments. It represents the next inflection point in the aerospace industry's ongoing evolution. Well, I mean, I'd quite like that. I would say that as a Deloitte employee, but I do like the way it brings out its people, its goods. It's looking at new emerging technology, and it represents an inflection point in the aerospace industry. Now, there are some commentators who might disagree with that, but there are certainly a lot who will agree with it. But let's go away from a management consultancy and let's talk about some people in the aviation space who really know their onions. So the next definition I'm going to give you: air transportation services for people and or cargo between places, local, regional, intra-regional, urban, using revolutionary new aircraft. Now, hopefully some of the people on this presentation will have heard that, and that's the NASA definition. So these people know what they're talking about, and actually the CAA have adopted this definition as well. But it's the same thing. It's people, it's cargo, it's moving things around, but it's using revolutionary new aircraft. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. Okay, so as I've alluded to, I'm from a management consultancy. That's my background. So I will spend a little bit of time talking about the context behind this, the numbers and the money behind it, because it's important. But don't worry, I will get onto the tech very soon. So don't glaze over just because you've seen numbers. But this is the basis. This is how it's going to work. A worldwide drone market. Okay, now we're looking here, and we're starting to now drill down into two of these areas. We're looking at the first one, which is the medical drone deliveries. Okay, So let's just look at the worldwide drone market overall. In 2019, they were talking about 5.5 billion US dollars. Okay, that's a lot of money. Okay, then we look down into the worldwide drone delivery market. It's 642 million US dollars. This is a couple of years ago. Then we can go down even further to medical drone deliveries, about 175 million, and then we look at EMEA, so a little bit more local, and then we're talking about the sort of $56 million money side. Okay, maybe not huge numbers from that perspective, but look at this bottom right curve, okay, and look at the infographic just above it. This is where it's starting to move. We're gonna see that number quadruple in the course of just a few years towards the end of this decade. That's really, really compelling because right now this is part of the industry that is moving now. It is really accelerating right now. And when I talk a little bit more about the people carrying, the cargo carrying side of things, you'll see that it's not quite at that acceleration point yet. It's got a little bit more maturity to go. But when we look at these smaller drones and moving them around, we're going to see these over the course of this decade. I'm going to repeat that, this decade. That is going to go by in an absolute heartbeat. So this is very, very exciting. I'm going to use a case study now because I've already spoken for a good few minutes, and I'm going to show you a video that was put together with an organization we've collaborated with, Skyports, which will put all of this into words, and also it gives a little bit of break so I can have a quick glass of water and you can see a video.
That's 6 minutes. Batteries are sufficient for the remainder of the flight. Communicate.
So I love that video. If the drones, the scenery, the concept, it's just brilliant. And you can see there, this was a great trial that was done. It got lots of national coverage from a press perspective, a UK first with respect to drone deliveries and COVID testing. So absolutely something which we could get behind with a cause because of the incredibly tough couple of years that we've had as a country, and to support has just been on a personal level very, very rewarding. But let's look again now into medical drone deliveries, and I've put a few points around this tree here that just shows some of the key points that we need to discuss with respect to medical drone deliveries. So first things first, location, location, location. There are certain areas where this type of technology is incredibly well suited to. Okay, when we're talking about relatively small packages, from a volume size, from a weight size, that where as the crow flies, the distance is relatively small, the time is relatively small, Okay, these are areas where the roads might be very, very poor. It might be mountainous regions, and very especially when there's waterways or island type environments. So this is where enormous savings from a time perspective can be realized. But why is that important? Well, it's important because of the clinical benefit, actually. This is at its core about improving the patient outcomes. It's about people. Now, this is a technical festival. I am hoping you're all as excited as I am about seeing the actual hardware, the tech itself flying. But this is about people. This is about making sure that we provide real benefit. And again, going back to the example of the trial up in Scotland, the use of drones provides real opportunities to improve services and will help enable quicker diagnosis for our patients. That's the view of the Chief Officer for Argyll and Bute Health and Social Care Partnership. Okay, it's not just about shiny tech, it is about people. So in terms of the output and the impact that this had, it was a relatively small trial over 3 months, over just 4 medical centres. And I have to say about the integrated order and tracking app, because that's what Deloitte did and what we were actually very proud to be part of within the wider piece that was put on by Skyports. Okay, but look at some of those numbers. For such a small trial, 11,000 hours of sample waiting time was saved, a 90% reduction in transport time. Urgent testing turned around in just 2 hours. These are rural communities, isolated communities. These are incredible savings that we're getting. And then from a numbers point of view, beyond visual line of sight flights flown, nearly 12,000 kilometers. That's a lot for just such a small trial. The benefit is huge. But look at that. Look at the paper aeroplane, and you can see as we move through the steps that faster supply chain with the integration of drones. What it leads to is faster diagnosis and faster treatment. It leads to improved levels of patient care and therefore better patient outcomes. And I want to bring it back to that all the time because it's really, really important. Okay, going back to our tree and our points that I wanted to just bring out for discussion. The next thing we need to look about is social acceptance. Social acceptance is absolutely vital to get that contract with the general public that we can start flying these new novel devices over their heads. We've got to make sure that the public feels safe, that they feel that there's no privacy issues, and they don't feel disturbed as a result of it. Now, again, going back to the trial, one of the really interesting things that came out is that when Skyports did their survey, there was some nervousness, there was some reticence about the use of drones in their area. But then they went afterwards and said, well, did any of this actually transpire to be true? And universally, they found that this was not the case. People were very accepting. So that's really important. And Drones for Good is a great way of getting that social contract to go and try. Getting the public to accept that we'll just go and try and see whether this is as bad as we might think. And in fact, it wasn't nearly that bad. So as we move forward with these Drones for Good cases, then we have a great way of then going and actually realizing the cost savings. Okay, because at the end of the day, this can't be for free. This needs to be there needs to be some form of cost saving. And that can be direct costs. Okay, so look at the drones themselves. You're not going to be flying, you're flying a route using electricity, so a lot cheaper than conventional fuels. You're doing it in a much as the crow flies. So you've got that direct saving. But look at the indirect savings. As we said, the clinical benefits that come out of that, and this is incredibly difficult to measure, by the way, but the clinical benefits that come out by speeding up that individual's treatment, that they either weren't hospitalized in the first place, or that their hospitalization was much shorter, that the drugs used were the correct ones. There weren't wasted drugs as medics try to find out the correct thing to prescribe. So there's huge numbers of indirect cost savings that can come because it's faster, because we're getting that better diagnosis earlier. And then let's look at the technical capability, okay? So it's not just about the drone itself, it's about the infrastructure that's required to support it. But the drone availability is very, very key. First generation drones didn't operate brilliantly in rain. they struggled with wind. As we get into second generation, we're getting much better rain performance, much better wind performance, and that's only going to continue as additional generations of drones come on. So the question isn't really whether the tech is ready, but it's actually now how to find the business models for the drone-enabled healthcare provision. Okay, this is absolutely intimately connected to creating that right policy environment. So now we move on to the regulation side of things. Right now, a lot of the trials that are happening around the country are based on temporary danger areas. Now, if you're not an airspace professional, don't worry, I'll go through these terms a little bit. But ultimately, a temporary danger area is either somewhere where you can only go in with extreme caution, or you're just not allowed into in the first place. Okay, so that's not going to work for a business as usual concept, because we can't just have vast swathes of the UK that you can't go and operate in because we've got drones flying around. So the next stage is to go to something maybe like a transponder mandated zone. Okay, that's where there's some form of electronic devices on all air vehicles within that zone that's making each other aware of where each of the vehicles is. So electronic conspicuity is the term that many people will have heard of. And then we move forward into truly unsegregated airspace. So what's the rules basis going to be for that? Well, I had a fascinating conversation with a colleague of mine who's from the Air Accident Investigation branch just recently. And his viewpoint was, well, maybe the automated vehicle should always have the right of way. Think about coding an algorithm that has to deal with absolutely every event that could possibly happen. I mean, it's just not really possible. So if we say that we can get an algorithm that automates flight to a much stricter set of rules so that we know how that the automated air vehicle is going to behave, then actually the human piloted vehicles or the human operated vehicles that are in the same vicinity, they have to avoid it because we have that ability to have multiple cognitive processes and thoughts. It's a very interesting way of looking at it, but it's a very unpopular way of looking at it as well. The general aviation community in the UK has had the rights of the lower airspace since the 1950s, since the 1960s. Okay, they're a very vocal community, and rightly so. But look at it maybe from a business value perspective. The business value of drones versus the business value of general aviation. Well, surely it's going to win from a drones perspective. Hang on, but let's think about it from a libertarian point of view and the rights of all airspace users. So is it fair that we turn around to, for example, the general aviation community and tell them that they need to change their behaviors after many decades of it? Because after all, the aim here is to democratize the use of lower airspace for all users. So it's a very healthy debate that's happening within the community, and there's a lot more to be taken forward. But certainly electronic conspicuity is going to be a key enabler moving forward, and the regulation that will underpin that for all users, be they crewed aviation or be they uncrewed aviation. And then also on this slide, you see a report called Medicine from the Sky, Opportunities and Lessons from Drones in Africa. It's a fabulous report. I was very privileged to play a very small part in authoring it, but it really is very, very interesting. And if you have a chance to download it and have a read, then I do recommend it to you. It talks about enabling factors for rapid adoption. It talks about addressable need, as in there's a business case requirement for it. Places drones as a fit within the existing supply chain. Because again, let's look at this. This is not me evangelizing and saying drones will replace everything. All the medical deliveries that ever will happen will be from a drone in the future. No, and anybody who says that in the industry, well, be polite to them, but put them in a corner and let them just keep talking. This is about another option within the logistics mix when it is the right option. Okay, and then one of the other points that this report discusses is the regulatory environment, as we've just discussed, and the community that embraces the value of the technology. So again, these are the kind of things. While the report focuses on Africa, they're very, very relevant to all geographies. And it's some of the things I've already discussed on this slide. Hopefully that's been a nice introduction from a medical drone delivery perspective, but let's now start to go to the other end of the spectrum, to the people and the cargo movement side of things. Now, I spoke before about how the point of inflection for medical drone deliveries is pretty much here and now. In that bottom right infographic and graph, what we see is some enormous numbers. The potential for this industry worldwide is absolutely staggering, and there's lots of commentators who've put varying amounts on this, and I'm not going to comment on the correctness of those, but what I can show you is that it is starting to move in the middle of this decade, and then it is going to accelerate into the 2030s, and by the 2040s you will see commentators are thinking that we will be pushing absolute exponential growth, and that's where we start talking about autonomy. For a lot of this class of vehicles, we're talking about crewed vehicles in the initial time. And that comes with the social acceptance aspects and the safety aspects. The next point I've put on this slide is the distributed aviation new economic model by ADS Group. It's a great report. It really is. It's quite succinct, and it brings out a lot of things which are specific to the UK. I've read it a couple of times. I really like it because it, unlike some of the other reports which just lump everything together, it does split where the money could be for the various subsections of the industry, which is very important for the UK because there aren't many aspects of the UK that are talking about covering the whole industry, all the way from vehicle creation right through to services, although we might talk about one of those a little bit later. So from that distributed aviation report, we have this graph at the top left. And this is commentators, educated people within the industry who really know their stuff. They were asked, when is entry into service, EIS, for these different use cases? And you can see the second one along, around city point-to-point transport. Okay, that's a little bit later on, 2030 to 2035. Sub-regional transport, though, that's the beginning part of this decade for new aviation, advanced air mobility. The beginning half of this decade, we're about to come to the end of 2021. It's going to be 2022 very soon. This is here, this is now. And then if we come back to intercity, that's somewhere at the second half of this decade. So you can see that things are starting to move literally with respect to these air vehicles. They will be coming online. You will see them in skies above you in not too many years' time. Kate, don't just believe me. Don't just believe these reports. You know, these reports are written by very, very astute people with great inside knowledge of the industry, but they're just opinions at the end of the day. Look at, though, the special purpose acquisition companies, the SPACs, that are putting genuine investment money into this. Joby, Archer, Lilium, Vertical Aerospace, okay, from Bristol, a great Bristol company. By my calculation, over the last 6 months, there's been some $8 to $9 billion worth of investment into these organizations under special purpose acquisition companies, under SPACs. Okay, investors are backing this. Investors see the potential of this industry. So that's why I truly believe that these reports are well-founded. They're not just opinion, because people are putting their money behind these. Okay, I've now spoken again for quite some time. So let's take another pause for a video. This time I'm going to use a Bristol-based company, Vertical Aerospace, and their CEO, Stephen Fitzpatrick, who will put all of these points a lot more lucidly and succinctly than I've been able to do so far.
We're going to look back at a time when we didn't have these vehicles flying over our skies, and thinking, can't believe we didn't have this. The X4 is going to be 100 times quieter than a helicopter. It's going to be zero carbon. It's going to be a fraction of the cost. Most important of all, it's going to be 100 times safer. So this is going to open up urban air mobility to a whole new range of passengers. It's the most exciting time in aviation for the last 70 years, really since the jet engine transformed the possibilities of flight. Electrification is having that same impact today. The energy transition, the switch from fossil fuels to zero carbon energy supplies is the biggest challenge facing humanity. I really believe in the power of human ingenuity and the spirit of creativity that drives us to find solutions to these challenges. If we focus on finding the solutions, this will drive us towards electrification of flight. This is probably the first commercial aircraft that most people will fly on that will have a zero carbon footprint. We've really embraced a partnership model, working with some of the world's leading suppliers in both aerospace and automotive. Companies like Rolls-Royce, who are providing our electric motors, maximizing weight and power efficiency, but also reliability. Companies like Honeywell, who've got more than 70 years experience building avionics and flight control systems. We're using the same basic technology that they've developed for the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, customized and designed for our vehicle. We're delighted to be working with such great global partners. I love traveling. I love flying to new places. It cannot be that the way we're going to solve climate change is by asking everybody to do less, to travel less, to turn back time and forego some of the advantages that technology has brought us. And I think when people start to understand just how much better these vehicles are than what we have today, it's going to completely change how people think about flying through the skies.
I love that video, and I love listening to Stephen Fitzpatrick talk. Just bringing out some of those points. 100 times safer. Okay, really interesting point, because a lot of people don't understand the way that eVTOLs are being designed, certainly in Europe for European certification. Okay, this means that a standard helicopter safety factor is 100 times less safe than a conventional aircraft. Okay, look, don't everybody now start ducking under desks every time a helicopter flies over you. They are still very safe. But I think there is that social feeling, that bias, that some people would not want to go and take a passenger flight in a helicopter. These eVTOL vehicles that are certified under the European Aviation Safety Agency, EASA regulations, will be the same safety factors as conventional aviation. You know, that's huge. It's a challenge. It's a real technological challenge, okay, but it's absolutely huge. And then I said we'd come back to sustainability a number of times. We are talking about zero carbon flight here. If you can't get excited by that, then I'm sorry that I haven't excited you about that. And by all means, please continue on with whatever you might be doing in the background while listening to this. But zero carbon aviation, it's mind-blowing. It's really fascinating. But what does that actually mean then for the local region, for the Southwest, for example? Okay, again, another great report, a NASA report here, talks about regional air mobility. Very applicable within Europe as well as the US, even though it is focused there. Okay, regional air mobility will fundamentally change how we travel, bringing the convenience, speed, and safety of air travel to all, regardless of their proximity to a travel hub or urban center. How many times have you thought about those trips down to Dorset and Devon and Cornwall, getting stuck on those roads? Could there be another alternative as we look within regional air mobility now that we have some of these vehicles, new conventional takeoff, new vertical takeoff vehicles? Okay, and the regional airports that we have could eventually serve large numbers of people who want that more efficient transport. Okay, and that would decrease emissions. It would decrease road congestion. It's not instead of, it's as well as, it augments the transportation system. Okay, they'll be less expensive. Stephen Fitzpatrick pointed out, you know, a step change in cost. Okay, that is what is going to enable these regional airports to grow, and they're very well positioned as airports because there's a lot of infra that is going to be required to support these novel vehicles. For example, you might need to have hydrogen refueling stations. You will need to have fast, high-power charging stations. You might need rapid battery swapping, which is a new technological skill within the aircraft handling space. So again, lots of thoughts for that, but it's a great case for regional airports because there's many essential facilities that are already there. So we're talking about upgrading those rather than brand new construction, which is always going to be less expensive. And just to show that it's not just about Deloitte, I quote some of our colleagues at McKinsey who've done their analysis, and it's saying that across Europe, 50% of people live within 30-minute drive of a regional airport. 50% of people. That's absolutely huge market that's out there with the potential to be opened up. Let's just take this from a UK example. This infographic here, point of origin, point of destination. Okay, let's just imagine that point of origin, you can take an electric taxi close to a regional airport that's near you, or maybe even something which is very close, a little aerodrome which is currently licensed. There's 150 plus licensed aerodromes in the UK at this time. Could we use those? They're already available. You then connect your journey 150 miles to wherever it might be locally. You jump on the e-scooter that is available to you to get you to your point of destination, and you reverse that. Okay, your emissions have been tiny, your comfort has been great, and you've done that connection, which so many of us are looking forward to rekindling as a balance with our new hybrid ways of working. It's a thought, but it's actually pretty close to reality now, in my opinion. Okay, I'm just going to conclude with a few points with respect to some initiatives that are going on around the country, which I think are absolutely fabulous, and I will also say that Deloitte are part of one of them. If we start off in the bottom right, we see the Frisson aircraft, which is a hydrogen-powered aircraft with Cranfield University. This is taking a Britten-Norman Islander aircraft and converting it to a hydrogen-fueled aircraft. Looking at those novel technologies, it is not a clean sheet design, it is changing an old design, but it is fulfilling the basis, the technology demonstration for what could eventually be a clean sheet. Look in the middle though, this is a clean sheet design from Scandinavia. This is Heart Aerospace. Brand new 19-seat electric aircraft. Absolutely incredible company that's doing some really great things and is starting to get traction with an order for 200 aircraft from United Airlines. Again, exciting times. Conventional aircraft, not just vertical takeoff. And then finally, Heathrow. The big players in the industry want to change. They've got two projects under the Future Flight Challenge, one of which we're involved in, which is called Project Napkin, the new aviation propulsion knowledge and innovation network. Doesn't run off the tongue as much as I would have liked, but what that is looking at, it's looking at what is the choice availability that's out there. How is the public going to change their choice when these new vehicles come online? What does the technology do? How does that affect the finances of it? What's the infrastructure requirements at the airport? How are we going to phase all of these things together? It's a devilishly complicated problem to solve, but what a fascinating problem and what a challenge to go and try and solve. And that's where it requires technology-based individuals, people with that technology training background, people with that education, people with that inspiration. And certainly Bristol is very, very well placed, and the Southwest in general, very, very well placed to provide those individuals going forward into this industry. Okay, just to sort of sum up the talk, this slide and one more before I open to any further questions or look at the comments that are in the box in the chat window. Haven't touched upon sensing. Hopefully I brought out sustainability a little bit, quite a bit, and hopefully you understand a little bit more about advanced air mobility. I'm just going to dwell on this slide before I finally go across to questions. The reason I chose these pictures, now the bottom left one should be pretty obvious with respect to medical drone deliveries. There's an expanse of water, there's an urban situation here. If you think how long it could take to get a test, a medicine from one side of that city to another, the time saved would be huge and the clinical benefit would be immense to an individual. But then let's look at the other ones. Regional airports. We can develop those runways a lot quicker than we can by clean sheet designs. But do we need that, or can you even look at the farmer's field where there's a landing strip already on there? Could that be something which you could use in the near future to take a trip using a zero-emission aviation, a zero-emission air vehicle? And ultimately, we all want to be able to connect with our loved ones, with our colleagues, and we want to do so in a socially responsible way. Thank you very much for listening to me. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I will just cut across now to the comments box to see if there's any questions. If not, then please do start typing away, and hopefully I've given you some thoughts and some ideas to take away. Right, well, thank you to Lisa. How far off are we from seeing zero carbon aviation widely available? It's a great question, Lisa, and it's going to come in stages. So when you look at the class of vehicle that Vertical Aerospace are building, for example, the Vertical Aerospace are publicly committed to certification in 2024. So that means that you're looking at the middle of this decade, going to be seeing these type of air vehicles moving around. The numbers that Vertical Aerospace are talking about are in the sort of 50 to 100 mark. So it's not going to be a lot. It's going to replace initially a lot of the traditional helicopter routes, but it's going to bring the cost of transport down hugely. So it should be open to a lot more people. Part of advanced air mobility is about making this more accessible, more available to the general public, and not to be seen as the purview of the rich and the famous, because otherwise we are just targeting a similar model to those who are already using helicopter flights to move from London to Oxford, from Bristol down to the southwest, as I suggested. As we then roll into some of the larger class of vehicles, well, that's going to take a little bit longer to come through, but you can see that Heart Aerospace are developing a 19-seat regional aircraft. The various other models that are available out there, be it the Frisson, be it the BEHA, the British hybrid aircraft that's being developed in Cambridgeshire out of Duxford. Again, those are the second half of this decade that they'll start to become available. And then you look more at the hydrogen-powered aircraft, which Airbus has publicly committed to that sort of narrow body going into Europe type trip. They've committed to the middle of next decade to be launching these services. So that kind of gives you the time frame of how it will go in steps, but ultimately we'll be starting to see it from the middle of this decade into the latter part of next decade. Well, thank you, everybody. I don't see any further questions coming through. So I see Ben has just appeared as I was getting close to handing back over to him. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for your attention. And I hope it's given you some food for thought to take away for the rest of the day.